Welcome, everyone, to the Obligations of Memory podcast. I'm Jeffery Giesener, founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. And we're with a terrific group of people here, the Maggid family. And we have Randi, we have Ben, we have Liana, and we have Adam, all hoping to present part of their family story, which I think is great. And I'm going to go to Randi, who was sort of the catalyst of getting this interview started. Randi has a terrific book, and I'm going to introduce Randi by reading a little bit of her bio. Randi received a BA in journalism from University of Southern California and a Master's of Science Management degree from Boston University. She was an art director in Los Angeles and Chicago and owned an art and frame gallery in Israel. She worked in public relations before marrying and having a family. So I'm going to start off by talking about your book just briefly. And you have authored a book called Beverly Hills Concentration Camp, which really has an impactful title. And I want to kind of not get into the details, which we'll do later on, but what was your sort of catalyst for wanting to write the book, what the book meant to you, and why you chose the title?
Well, the catalyst was that I was in pain, physical pain. I thought my life was perfect and everything was going well. And all of a sudden, my body broke down and I started to journal. And the journaling helped me deal with trauma, and it became a book. One day I decided to type it up and it became a book.
And when was this? When was this roughly?
Well, I published in 2016, so I started that 6 years earlier, so
Okay.
2010. And when I was thinking of titles, the most authentic title was Beverly Hills Concentration Camp. And I knew I would get pushback for it. I knew people wouldn't like it, but I had to be real about this. So.
Okay, so I'm going to ask each of you, I'm going to ask David. So Randi gave up about 8 years of some part of her life to write this. And I'm curious, as her husband, how you felt about her giving up that much time to write this book.
Well, it kind of was in stages, because the initial stage was more of journaling, and it was very therapeutic. And Randi had stuff to get off her chest, and so that was, I think, a helpful process. And then that kind of morphed into writing a book. And yeah, I thought it was a great idea and a great story. And I think we were all a little bit involved in that process, and kind of cheering her on. It took a long time and a lot of editing, but I thought it would be beneficial for Randi and a good read.
Terrific. And how about Liana and Adam? You gave up some of your mom also to the book writing process. So you can unmute yourself and stay unmuted so that you can contribute at any point in time. So, and you can see that we're starting off by coming right to you and asking you what you thought about the time. Adam, did you lose soccer games to your mom's book writing and dance lessons or what?
I'd say that, my mom was still very present, whether she was like writing or she was working on her book at all. She was still, with us. There wasn't really anything that I gave up, I would say. Obviously, there was a lot of time on the computer for her and a lot of time that she needed just writing, but she was still there for me at all times. It was a fun process for her, and you can tell she really enjoyed it, even if it was frustrating at times. So just to see her do that, it was good for me too, I would say. I'm glad she went through it all.
And Liana, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything Adam just said. I think at the time, I always thought it was cool that she was writing a book. I feel like it was kind of an example, to me at least, of, just because you have a family and kids, you don't have to give up a hobby. You can still be creative. You can still kind of put out those kind of creative projects into the world. And I don't think I realized the kind of depth that the book really carried until after it was finished, which I know sounds crazy, but I just didn't realize how important it was for that story to be told. So I'm super happy that she did it. And she's been my best friend this whole time. So I don't think I missed anything.
Well, that's really nice. And how old are you? Look so close in ages. Or what are your ages? Who's
No,
older?
he
Who's old?
is, I'm older.
Okay, how old are you?
I'm 22.
22. And Adam?
I'm 20.
So that's very good. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears here and now go back to, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that they had a very integral part in my book because I read them the stories. A lot of times I would read it to them and see their reaction. So
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to go back and talk, I've learned that your mom is still living. Your mom is, what's her name?
Naja.
Nadja, and she's 95. God bless her. And your father passed when?
When I was 4.5,
Wow.
1969, I think.
Wow, so it's gone a
Yeah.
long time. So we're going to go all the way back, and we're going to talk a little bit about life before that, that your parents talked to you about, maybe not your father, but your mother, about their lives before the Shoah. Where did they live? Where and what customs? Were they religious? Maybe you can tell me a little bit of what you know about their past.
Okay. First of all, my mom did not talk about this at all. Really not at all. And so that's why I knew how horrible it was, because of the silence. But there were, little hints here and there. So, and then later, Ben and I filmed my mother and I asked her a lot of questions, and that's how I got a lot of this information. She was ready to speak at that point. So my mother was born in 1927 in Ozorkov, Poland. And my father was born in Lodz. And I'm not sure what year. And so she had a very large family, very religious family. And her mother owned a bakery. Her grandmother owned a bakery. And all the kids would come and get baked goods and look in the window. And she would always describe how nice that was to have this bakery and to have all these noodles. They would have noodles at the bakery.
On
And
Fridays.
what?
On Fridays.
On
The
Fridays.
noodles are on Fridays for Shabbat.
Okay, so the noodles, thank you. And the challah, right? So, yeah, so the grandmother was really the breadwinner of the family, and her husband studied. And that's basically most of the stories that I heard. A funny story about the grandfather was that, there were a lot of kids around, a lot of little kids running around, and he wanted to study. So he asked his best friend, who was the head of the jail, to open up the jail and let him come in and study. And he asked the guy to lock the door. So he basically imprisoned himself so he could study and keep quiet, have a nice quiet.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the show, but I do want to trace how your parents came through the Shoah, which concentration camps, were they deported? Your father may have been in the Lodz ghetto, so help us understand your background there.
Okay, so my mother was in the Ozorkov ghetto and then the Lodz ghetto. And then she went to Auschwitz. The really important thing, and the thing I remember a lot about, it kind of haunts me, is when she describes when she stood in front of Mengele, and she says, she would point her finger and say, she sent my mother.
He would point his finger.
What?
He would point his
Sorry,
finger.
he would point. He would point the finger, and my mother would go like this. It gives me chills. I'm sorry, but Mengele pointed for my mother to go one way and her mother to go another way, and so my mother survived, and it was because she the women were telling her to pinch her cheeks, to look older, to stand up on her tippy toes, pinch her cheeks to make more color in her face. And so she would look stronger. So she survived, she went into Auschwitz. When all of that was over, she was
How old was your mother? Do you know?
11.
Hmm.
So basically she was there from, through all of this from 11 to
She would have been
18.
older. She would have been older. By the time she got to Auschwitz, she was 11 in the ghetto. But
Right.
Auschwitz, I think she was 16. From 27 to 43. 1943 is when she got to Auschwitz, I believe. So she
Okay.
was 16.
All right. So let me just tell you how the world combines threads here.
Mhm.
My mother was deported at age 15 from Košice with her 3 sisters. Magda was age 8. She was ordered off the catalytic car by Mengele. She was pointed to go left. Her mother wouldn't allow her to go on her own, and they both were perished by gas on day 1. So you can see how already, without even knowing our mutual stories, we're starting to have threads that are coming together. So, yep. So, okay, she was in Auschwitz and she survived Auschwitz. So now we're going to just remove that whole subject,
Okay.
because this is really not what our podcast is about. But I'm really interested now to understand your parents' story of survival. So how, when they were, when she got out of Auschwitz, what did she do next? Did she go to a DP camp? Did she go back to Poland?
What she
How
did next was a woman took her in, gave her food, a bath, all that stuff, and wanted to adopt her and told her that everyone had died, and she didn't believe it. And so she said, no, I'm going back to Ozerkov. And she went back to her village and, she saw what was really going on, what really happened. And then she saw some relatives who were there with my father. And that's when my father met her.
And where was that? Where was this?
In Ozerkov,
What country?
Poland,
Okay.
Ozerkov, Poland. And then, one thing led to another. They went to the German deportation camp together. They got married there, and they had my oldest brother there.
And how many, what are your siblings? You have an older brother. How old is he?
Well, he passed away. He was 14 years older than me.
Mhm.
Um,
And any other siblings? I'm sorry about to hear that.
that's I have one other, but he sort of disappeared. It's another
Okay.
story.
Okay.
I do have to say something important is that my father had a daughter from another marriage before he met my mother, and she was at the gates of Auschwitz also, and the women brought her in and passed her around like a little football, trying to hide her, and they found out. So I had a half sister that perished in the Holocaust, which is
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that.
Well, the legacy is really important. And so your parents met met at the DP camp. And what was their life? How long did they spend in the DP camp? How did they figure out? And where did they immigrate to? Did they come to the United States? How did they get to the United States, if that's the case, or maybe a different country? Tell us a little bit about how their trip to the United States. And Ben, are you a 2G as well, or are you a second generation, or are you have no Holocaust, right?
No Holocaust. I'm third generation American.
Okay. Okay.
My dad was actually in the U.S. Navy band in World War II.
Okay. All right. All right. So tell us a little bit about how they figured out how to get to where they made their first stop.
Well, from what I understand, they were choosing between Israel and America, and they decided to get on the ship and come to Ellis Island. And that's when their name Leschinsky got changed to Lesser. So, and they lived in New York for a while.
Where in New York?
I don't know.
Okay.
Exactly. I assume the city. And then they went to Chicago, which was way too cold for them. And then they ended up in Los Angeles. And my father, he was a butcher, he was a tailor, he cut bathing suits for Catalina Swimwear. He did a lot of jobs before becoming a contractor. And when he became a contractor, he became quite successful and moved to Beverly Hills, like the Beverly Hillbillies. They moved to Beverly Hills. So
And your mother, did she have a trade or she was a homemaker or what?
he was a homemaker.
Okay. And so when did your oldest brother come along and what was it? And I'm kind of asking you to represent all of your siblings. What was it like growing up? Tell me when you were born, what year, and then what was it like to grow up in a survivor's home?
I was born in 1964. Well, I would say that before my father died, I think that it was very nice. It was, I felt special. But I would say when he died, everything fell apart. And in a way, I felt that my mother gave up on things, on certain things. And you could tell sort of by the furniture, by, she didn't buy anything new. I think that she was so affected by the Holocaust that she didn't deserve anything nice, didn't deserve things.
And how old were you when your father passed?
4.5.
Okay, so you can even remember those things, which is quite remarkable that you
Yeah,
can kind of dial into the fact that you felt that your mother gave up even at age 4.
Yeah, I mean, they would have beautiful furniture from Glabin's Furniture, furniture store, the nice, they had all the nice stuff, they had parties all the time. I remember all the parties and her cooking, and I do remember that it was happy. But when he died, and she was left with 3 kids, she didn't know what to do. And I didn't think she got the best advice from people either. And it's a learned helplessness that I think she felt from her childhood.
Okay, so we're gonna, obviously, there's some pain there, and I don't want to spend time on the trauma, but when you grew up in that home and you became a teenager, let's say, what were some of the things that were impacting you that you could say you sort of inherited? I'm talking about the inherited trauma that we also know that is very much a part of the second generation and perhaps the third generation. So I'm kind of leaning you down, and if I'm leaning you incorrectly, you can course correct. But what were some of the things you were experiencing as a teenager in your mom's home?
Lots of food. Definitely, on the one hand, it was delicious. We had the best food. I've never been without a meal in my life. And we had the best. At the same time, I had to eat a lot of it in order to be a good girl. I had to eat a lot. And my mother would leave the dishes out with the food on it. I mean, all day, so that if in case you were hungry as you walked by the buffet table, you could grab something. And
Now, was your mom a great cook and baker?
yes, she baked like your mother, I believe, with your apple pie. Oh yeah, she made apple pies, and she made, those strudels and with the little doughs, the
Not
little
roll,
dough.
not roll strudels, yeah.
Yes, she made all that, and she made stuffed peppers. She made anything she made was delicious.
And how did she, I'm curious because my mom never had a recipe that she worked off of, so it was always memory. So did your mother work off of her memory when she cooked and baked, or do you remember her having a written recipe?
No recipes. No.
That is so interesting. I have a story for you about Auschwitz. In my work of leading the group, I did a program with another author, Eva Moremi from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she had her mother, who was an Auschwitz survivor, and her mother stole some ammunition labels. On one side, it was grenades and bullet sizes, and on the other side, it was completely blank. And she saw hundreds of these. They were thrown away in the garbage, and she sneaked them back into the camp. And what was going on in the evenings in the camp is that the inmates were talking about recipes that their mothers would make and the details of what those recipes were. And since my mother, and I never asked, because as you talked about, mom never spoke either, that she would write down these recipes, and she wrote over 600 recipes down that were discussed verbally in the camps.
Mm.
And Eva's book is called Hidden Recipes, a Holocaust Memoir. And Eva donated the 600 different recipes on the original ammunition labels to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. So
Wow.
that's probably the same way your mother learned. Is she at a young age, she was memorizing recipes. My mother cooked 200 different bakes, and I've kind of figured out how to do only 50 of them. I can't get beyond like 50 because I can't find research to do some of the research. But I, like your mother, my mother would not allow anybody to leave the table without asking for thirds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is such an interesting way that our parents would react. And food was life for my mom.
Yeah. So it was beautiful in one sense. On the other side, I was heavy. I went to Beverly Hills High. I didn't want to be heavy.
Mhm.
So I would watch what I ate as a teenager. I started to watch what I ate. I remember asking my mom to take me to the doctor so I could actually have a list of what to eat. And I went to the doctor with her, and the doctor was obese, really big. And I felt so stupid to, asking the doctor, and the doctor started laughing at me, but she gave me a list of foods, and I started to follow what she said.
So I think you'll find this story interesting. My mom, I was like a pencil growing up, sort of like Adam there, and maybe even thinner. And so my mom was afraid that I was going to die because I wasn't eating. So she took me to the doctor, which was a family doctor, and he was from Košice, Czechoslovakia, where my mother was. He was a survivor. And she forced him to give me sugar pills. And they were designed to convince me that I was not eating. So I would eat these pills thinking they would make me hungry and that I would eat more food. So it was just the opposite of how your mother treated you. But I found that story to be really a funny story.
Yeah. And when I was dieting, or actually I wasn't really dieting, I was just eating healthy, I was a bad girl. I was a good girl if I pigged out on the buffet table. So it was very difficult for me just to get to the normal place, just to be where everybody else was food-wise.
My sister would be agreeing with you. She's 4 years older than I am. And she always had the same kind of concerns, I think. She still does.
And another thing, besides the food, was a fear of going outside. Whenever I would want to go anywhere, a concert, go to the beach, go out with friends, my mother would say, "Do you really have to go? Do you really have to?" And I would think to myself, well, no, I don't have to, but I want to. So, it's the same thing, if she would see a police car go by, she would say in Yiddish, "Ir du," like they're here, they're. So for a while, it took me a long time to understand that this fear had to do with her upbringing.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I wanted to ask you to move it a little forward, and I'm saying you're now leaving the home. Your
Mhm.
mother is now on her own because you've gone to college. So how was you going from LA to, you went to Well, you started at Southern California, so did you live at home? Or did you
Um,
live in the dorms or?
So I went to UC Santa Barbara. I pretended that I had applied to UCLA. I had a very dysfunctional home. My brothers were very abusive. It was not a pretty kind of upbringing. And I really wanted to, I guess, escape. And so I just applied to UC Santa Barbara and I got in. And I didn't really understand about dorms. I had nobody to help me. And what I ended up doing was renting an apartment and renting half of it out to someone else. Because my father built buildings, in my head, it was about renting out space, So I rented out half my unit and I never lived in a dorm. I'm really happy that my kids got that experience. So, the experience of living in a dorm and living in an apartment. But my mother never called me while I was away at school. She never called me. It was always me calling home, and I was considered kind of a traitor. I left everybody. So that was another reason it was just so hard for me to be normal, because nobody else had this kind of pressure. It was as though if I was eating healthy, I was bad. If I was going to learn and wanting to be something in life, I was bad. So that was my experience. And fortunately, I had a lot of good friends and I had a few escapist habits that were probably not the best. But I did what I had to do. And for me, it was survival. Survival for, I guess, wealthier people.
Okay, so I want to let you know we've come to the 30-minute mark of our first episode. So I'm Jeff Giesener for the Obligations of Memory podcast. We're talking to the Maggid family, and we're going to come back shortly and continue on with how you met your husband and Ben. And I think that'll be a really interesting story. So I'll be right back. Thanks for listening.